You wake up in a bed the size of most people's living rooms, in a palace you have genuinely never fully explored, in a country your family does not merely govern, they gave it their name. You are a prince of the House of Saud. And here's the first thing that catches almost everyone off guard. When most people picture a royal family, they picture something small, a king, a queen, a handful of heirs, the way it works in Britain or in the old palaces of Europe. So when someone says they're a Saudi prince, you assume they must be one of maybe a dozen. Rare, precious, close to the throne. You're not. There are thousands of you. Nobody outside the family knows the exact number. Estimates run from a few thousand to as many as 15,000 royals. And the reason there are so many comes down to simple arithmetic stretched across 3 generations. The founder of the modern kingdom had many wives and fathered dozens of sons. Those sons each had many children of their own, and their children had children. Compound large families like that over 90 years, and a single founding king doesn't leave behind a household. He leaves behind an entire class of royalty, thousands strong. So being a prince here doesn't mean what it means almost anywhere else on earth. It's less a rare crown and more a vast, sprawling club, and, as you'll see, one with brutally strict rankings inside it. Collectively, that family is often said to control something like $1.4 trillion. That figure is impossible to verify and almost certainly imprecise. But even its vagueness tells you everything. In your family, wealth isn't counted the way normal wealth is counted. It's closer to territory. Most people would tell you that you've just won the single greatest lottery a human being can be born into. And in almost every way money can measure, they are completely right. But here's what those people don't understand. Being born a Saudi prince is not one thing. It's a pyramid, thousands strong at the bottom, one man at the very top, and where you sit on it, and what it quietly costs you to stay there, is a far stranger story than the palaces let on. Let me walk you through your life. Level 1. The fortune. Your family's fortune did not come from building a company or inventing a product. It came from being the family that happened to be holding the sword when underneath the sand of the Arabian desert, someone found the largest, cheapest to reach reserves of oil on the planet. That oil became a company, Aramco. And Aramco is not a normal company. When it sold a sliver of itself to the public in 2019, it was valued at nearly $2 trillion, briefly making it the most valuable company on Earth, worth more than Apple, more than the economies of most countries. And the state that owns the overwhelming majority of it is, functionally, run by your family. So when people say your family is worth over $1 trillion, they're pointing at the wrong thing. The family's real wealth isn't a bank balance. It's a nation-sized flow, the daily river of money that comes out of the ground and runs, by design, toward the top of the pyramid you were born onto. And you, as a prince, are plugged directly into that river. For decades, members of the royal family received allowances, monthly stipends simply for existing, scaled to how close you are to the founder's bloodline. A minor prince might have received a comfortable salary. The senior ones, sums that would make a Western CEO look like they were working for tips. To give that a shape, the royal allowance system was, for years, an entire bureaucracy of its own, a standing budget just to keep thousands of princes in the style the family expects, covering not only monthly stipends, but palaces, staff, travel, and even the debts royals ran up. Diplomatic cables that leaked years ago described it bluntly as one of the great drains on the state, a family payroll closer in size to a country's public sector than to any private fortune. And that was only the official channel. On top of it ran land grants, sweetheart business deals, quiet commissions on state contracts, and 100 other ways the river found its way to the family. You didn't just receive money, you were born inside an economy partly built to fund your existence. That's the first thing to understand about your life. You have never once in your entire existence had to wonder where money comes from. It simply arrives, the way rain arrives for everyone else. Level 2. The pyramid. Now the part outsiders always get wrong. They picture a single, fabulously rich royal family. The reality is a vast ranked hierarchy, and your exact position on it decides almost everything. At the very base is the founder, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the warrior king who, through conquest and a great many marriages, welded the modern kingdom together in 1932 and fathered the dynasty. Every prince's status is measured, to this day, by one brutal question. How directly do you descend from him? If you are a son or grandson of the founder through a favored line, you are royalty in the fullest sense. Power, position, the top-tier allowance, a real shot at influence. If you are one of the thousands of distant cousins on a lesser branch, you are still unimaginably privileged by any normal standard. But inside the family, you are minor. You have the title. You have the money. What you do not have is proximity. And in your world, proximity is the only currency that actually matters. So the palaces and the jets can be misleading. Two men can both be Saudi princes and live in completely different universes. One shaping the future of a nation, the other a comfortable, well-funded spectator to his own family's power. You spend a strange amount of your life aware, always, of exactly which one you are. And the pyramid was not built by accident. Those many marriages that made the family so large were also what made it so powerful. Because each one was an alliance, knitting tribes and rival branches into the House of Saud so the whole structure would hold together. That is why, generations later, a surname alone tells no one where you stand. Two princes with the exact same name can live worlds apart. One descended from a king through a senior line, the other from a half-forgotten branch that married in 3 generations back. At every family gathering, an invisible seating chart runs through the room. Who greets whom first, who waits for whom, who is listened to, and who is merely tolerated. You learn to read that chart before you could read a book. The money is shared out across thousands of you. The power is not. And you learn young that those are two entirely different inheritances. Level 3. What it buys. So what does life actually look like from up here? At the material level, everything you have ever seen in a fantasy and things you haven't. Palaces with hundreds of rooms, a fleet of cars you will never finish driving, private jets treated the way ordinary people treat taxis, summers on super yachts off the French Riviera, entire floors of London and Paris hotels booked out, falconry, private zoos, gold-trimmed everything. Whole shopping trips where price is a concept that simply does not apply to you. But here's where your life diverges from a Western billionaire's, and it's the most important thing to understand about it. A Western billionaire's wealth is theirs. They earned it. They own it. They can do whatever they like with it. Fund a rocket company, run for office, criticize the government, move to another country on a whim. Your wealth is different. Your wealth is positional. It flows to you because of who you are inside the family and the state. And it keeps flowing only as long as you remain, in the family's eyes, the right kind of prince. You don't own the river. You are permitted to drink from it. And the scale of the spending is genuinely hard to hold in your head. Shopping trips that empty entire luxury boutiques, a single summer chartering a super yacht that costs more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes. Specialists and surgeons flown to you rather than the other way around. When a senior royal travels, it can mean a fleet of jumbo jets, hundreds of staff, cars shipped ahead, entire hotel floors sealed off. To you, none of this reads as extravagance. It reads as normal. And that is its own quiet prison, because you have no baseline. You carry no memory of a life where a thing had a price, and so you have nothing to measure any of it against. And that quiet word, permitted, is the crack that runs underneath the entire fortune. Level 4. The cage. And the cage is not only political, it's personal, and it reaches into corners of your life you'd assume were yours alone. Your marriage may be arranged around alliances rather than affection, a joining of branches decided with the family's interests in view. Your public role, your movements, how you must carry yourself when the cameras are on you, much of it is shaped by the institution, not by your own wishes. Even your reputation isn't truly your own. Embarrass the family abroad, and you have not made a private mistake. You have damaged an asset. From the outside, it looks like a life of infinite choice. From the inside, an astonishing amount of it was decided before you were old enough to want anything at all. Because here is the trade nobody puts in the brochure. You have wealth almost beyond counting. What you do not have, what you have never had, not for one day of your life, is the ordinary freedom that a completely broke person in a democracy takes entirely for granted. the freedom to say whatever you think, back whoever you want, and cross whoever you please, with no one able to take it all away. In your world, everything you have is held on a condition, and the condition is loyalty. Loyalty to the family, loyalty to whoever in this generation sits at the top of the pyramid. As long as you stay inside the lines, you are gilded. Step outside them, challenge the wrong senior royal, back the wrong side in a family power struggle, embarrass the institution, and you discover, fast, that everything you thought you owned was really only ever lent. And you don't have to imagine what that looks like, because you watched it happen. In 2017, dozens of the most powerful men in the kingdom, princes, ministers, some of the richest billionaires on earth, were summoned and detained inside the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh, in what was announced as an anti-corruption campaign. Men who owned palaces spent weeks held inside a five-star hotel, and many reportedly handed over enormous sums to secure their release. Picture it, the gilded cage made completely literal, a prison with chandeliers. Whatever you believe about why it happened, the lesson it broadcast to every royal was unmistakable, and you absorbed it in your bones. No amount of wealth in this family protects you from the family. The money was never a fortress. It was always a leash, a very long, very golden leash, and someone at the top has always been holding the other end. And loyalty, in your world, is not a feeling. It's a performance you keep up in public for your entire life. You attend the right funerals and the right weddings. You pledge allegiance, literally in a ceremony, when a new ruler takes the throne. You are seen supporting the leadership and never, where it counts, questioning it. Dissent doesn't have to be punished dramatically to be controlled. Most of the time, simply knowing what could happen is enough. Everyone remembers the ones who fell, the princes who ended up sidelined, stripped of their positions, detained, or who simply faded out of public life and were never spoken of again. You don't need to be told the rules twice. You watched and you understood. So you are richer than the kings of old, and less free than a taxi driver who can quit his job and tell his boss exactly what he thinks. Both of those things are true at once, and you live inside that contradiction every single day. Level 5. The narrowing. And in your lifetime, that contradiction has sharpened, because the pyramid has been changing shape. For decades, power in the family was spread, shared among the founder's many sons, passed brother to brother, balanced across branches. It was a fortune ruled by a committee of old men, and there was a strange safety in the sprawl. No single person could own you completely. Then came a consolidation. Power, over recent years, has concentrated dramatically toward one figure, the Crown Prince, and a modernizing vision for the country's future beyond oil, a plan to remake the entire economy before the river ever runs dry. For the kingdom's ambitions, many argue this focus is exactly what was needed, and that vision is genuinely enormous. A bet to raise futuristic cities out of empty desert, to pull half the economy off oil before the world stops buying it, to open the country in ways that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Cinemas, concerts, tourism, women behind the wheel. For a young population hungry for change, much of it is genuinely popular. But every great consolidation of ambition is also a consolidation of control. The same energy remaking the country is the energy that narrowed the family's many old power centers down toward one. And a lesser prince learns quickly that in a kingdom pointed in a single clear direction, there is enormous reward in rowing with it, and nowhere safe at all to row against. But for you, a lesser prince watching from the middle of the pyramid, it means something more personal. The many small ceilings you used to live under have been replaced by one very high, very singular one. The spread that used to protect you has narrowed. There are fewer patrons to appeal to, fewer branches to shelter under, and far less room to be a prince who quietly disagrees. The cage didn't disappear, it just got a single, much clearer key holder. And so you do what princes in your position have always done. You are careful, you are loyal, loudly and visibly. You enjoy the staggering wealth, and you keep your opinions where they belong, behind your teeth. You have everything, and you have learned, young, the precise price of keeping it. So, you woke up as a Saudi prince. You were born onto the greatest concentration of inherited wealth on the planet. You will never know hunger or debt or the fear of a bill. You have palaces and jets and a fortune that flows like weather. Almost every human being who has ever lived would trade places with you without a second's thought. And you have handed over, in exchange, the one thing that fortune was supposed to buy: the freedom to live as you actually choose. You cannot speak freely. You cannot fall out with the wrong person. You cannot ever be sure that everything you have won't be recalled on a quiet afternoon by someone whose loyalty test you happen to fail. You are one of the richest people on earth, and you do not fully own your own life. That's the trap hiding inside the palace, and it's a very old one, just dressed in gold. We imagine that enough money must eventually buy freedom. Your entire existence is the proof that it can buy the exact opposite, that wealth and autonomy are not the same thing, and that a person can have an ocean of one and almost none of the other. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with the next time you catch yourself envying a life like this. The ordinary person scrolling past a photo of your yacht has something you were never given and can never buy back: a life that is small and unwatched and entirely their own. They can quit. They can leave. They can say the wrong thing at dinner and wake up the next morning with everything they own still theirs. You cannot. You have traded the freedom to be a nobody for the burden of being a somebody whose every move is weighed, and no one ever asked you whether you wanted to make that trade. You lie back down in your enormous bed, in your endless palace, in your family's kingdom. And somewhere in the same palace, tonight, a new prince is being born into all of it. The wealth, the walls, the golden leash he won't feel for years. He'll think, like you once did, that he's the freest person alive.